Hey everybody, I'm Francesca Maxime, and this is a bonus WiseGirl for Monday, December 5th. I went to a lecture recently here in New York City at NYU as part of Mindful NYU with one of my teachers. Her name's Tara Brock. And one of the things that she said really resonated with me, and I wanted to share it with you. She said, the primal mood of the separate self is fear. Something is wrong, something is missing. And then we add on, something is wrong with me. And I think she's absolutely right about that. And I also think that there's a really nice gift around the corner if we can get beyond that story or that set of beliefs that we may be telling ourselves, even at a subconscious level, if not overtly, that something is wrong with me. First of all, I wrote about it about a month ago in an article for the Huffington Post that I did, and started off with a little anecdote about how the writer Anne Lamott, who another one of my teachers, Jack Kornfield, always talks about. He quotes this a lot, saying, my mind is like a bad neighborhood. I try not to go there alone, right? Because sometimes these thoughts just keep arising that are just negative. Negative self-talk, the inner critic, the inner judge, whatever you want to call it. I know that for many, many, many years, that inner judge was sitting there with a gavel in my head and in my heart, really, in a way that, wasn't very helpful. Let's just put it that way. But I also had this other quote in there, which was from Abe Lincoln, that said, most folks are about as happy as they make up their minds to be. And I always hated that quote because I was like, well, if I am what I think, which is this judge with the gavel and, always being very critical of everything, then I have to be a terrible person, or this is awful, or whatever. I'm doomed, basically. On the other hand, I sort of now have recently have a deeper understanding of what that quote means, which is we can shift our attention and shift our focus into a more positive, if you will, a more curious, a more hopeful, a more open-ended, open-hearted state, so that we can actually beckon in more good things and not actually facilitate more negative things from happening, and be a magnet, which we often inadvertently end up being for bad things happening in our life and reoccurring. But two kind of, hopeful things, I guess, I want to share with you about this. Number one, I've been doing a lot of research work on neuroscience and on trauma, as well as somatic experiencing, and how negative experiences get stored in the body, and how our brains and the way that we sort of cognitively remember certain things or deal with things don't always hold all of the full picture of the answer. But sometimes we find ourselves getting more contracted, getting more reactive with people or things, or otherwise not really feeling like we're resting in that sort of home of comfort and relaxation, the amniotic fluid, if you will, of the womb that we all so long to go back to. Well, it may not ever get quite that easy in some respects, but in some respects it actually can, because when we shift the attention of our mind to being open to the fact that some of the thoughts that we think about ourselves really aren't true, they're delusional, but they are hardened beliefs that came into being as a survival mechanism from our childhood, as we had to learn how to adapt to ill-attuned caregivers in our childhood, and also mixed messages oftentimes from society around us about sort of unseemingly impossible demands about who we should be, like if we're, for example, a woman, how you should look, what kind of, body should you have, what kind of way should you be with your mate. For a man, perhaps some of the conversation is about how much money you should make, and what kind of toys you should have, like boats and cars and things. And not that there's anything wrong with paying attention to those things, but those things don't constitute the real deeper sense of who we are and how we conceive of ourselves. So a radical idea that I want to share with you is the more that we think of ourselves in a way that is positive, that we think of ourselves as there's nothing wrong with me, that there never was, and that while some of my behavior could use some tweaking perhaps, right? Because we have to learn new ways of being, that the very simple fact of shifting our perspective on our own inner selves and releasing some of that inner critic starts to retrain the neural pathways in our brain structurally that have been habituated to act in a certain way over time, that then attracts, like a magnet, more negative experiences that then fulfill our belief system that we are junky. So, if you're following me, which I hope you are, essentially what I'm positing and sort of submitting to you and inviting you to consider is simply this. This whole idea of positive affirmation never necessarily really resonated with me because I couldn't ever get past the idea that the judge, the inner critic, that voice inside my head wasn't actually who I really am. But when you think about it, who came out of the womb? How could that person have done anything wrong? Is that not still who you are? Are you not just the caterpillar that became the butterfly and maybe got a little banged up and bruised along the way? But is that not really still you? And is that core nature of being kind, being open-hearted, being curious, being alive, being vibrant, is that not really who you are? And if you're that way, isn't it really true that everybody else also shares that? And so in looking at everyone that we see, our boss that irritates us, our friend that isn't really speaking to us, our, the teacher at our kids' school that seems to drive us mad, can we not separate people's behaviors from the fact that everybody inside really has an inner sense of goodness and innocence about them? Their behavior may not be so helpful, but we can look at them with compassion just as we look at ourselves with compassion in terms of our actions that may not always be skillful. But underneath it all, we can know that we're okay and that that tank of gas can be automatically refueled and replenished with things like meditation, taking a walk, petting our cat or dog, going to the beach or to the mountains for a little hike, whatever it is that works for you, going to Pilates, going to yoga, going for a run, that there's a certain amount of that kind of connection to ourselves that can help remind us that we are what we seek. Because when we go out there and we try to buy things and we try to look a certain way and we try to make sure that everybody else is happy based on societal expectations of what that is, we are never satisfied because we're chasing. We're chasing. And Wall Street likes it and Madison Avenue likes it because we buy a lot of junk. And some of it's helpful stuff. I mean, yes, of course, we need certain things, right? But a lot of it is stuff we don't need that we kind of are using to fill ourselves up. And it could also be the refrigerator, or it could be the casino, or it could be the bottle, depending on how extreme we're going with this. But it's all an attempt at self-nurture. But what about not needing to sort of need and crave and grasp for all that stuff outside of us? What if, breathing. What if we could learn to really just recognize that 95% of what's going on up here with our thoughts, delusions, created for a good purpose, but not rooted in reality? What if we brought to ourselves the idea that we are what we seek, that we're the bomb, and so is everybody else deep inside, and we're in this together, It's kind of like the calmer, the more truly confident and not cocky or arrogant that I can be, the more presence, the more mindfulness, the more thoughtfulness, the more compassion, the more kindness that I can bring to others. And when I do that, then good things start coming back to me. It's not always just this codependent idea of giving and giving and giving for the sake of others and then feeling like you're bereft at the end of the day. So, I would just invite you to have a radical idea in your head that you're the bomb. There's nothing wrong with you. There never was. The thoughts with the inner critic, they're delusional. They're just a creation of the mind as a result of conditioning that was necessary as a child to survive ill attunement, but is no longer necessary in that way anymore, and that now we can kind of change it. And in changing our brains, we're actually changing our thoughts and the way that we think, we're actually changing our brains. So the more we practice it, the better and easier it gets, and the more automatically that it happens. So just remember, you're the bomb. All right, that's today's Wise Girl. See ya. Thanks. Bye.